You are about to enter the Shockwave Skull Sessions podcast on shockwaveskullsessions.com. And now your host, Bob Nalbandian. Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Matt Hartnett, co-host, producer here for Shockwave Skull Sessions podcast. As you guys all know, Bob's voice has been on the mend the last few weeks since he had his throat surgery. So what he's decided to do is go ahead and give it a rest for a little while until he can get back to at least, close to 100%. So we're going to go ahead and put up our first archive episode. This is from back in 2010. This is an Iron Maiden special. It's with Brian Slagel from Metal Blade Records, as well as Malcolm Doane from Classic Rock Magazine. This is part 3 of an album archives episode where they talk about Bruce Dickinson and his return for the Ed Hunter tour, as well as a subsequent Brave New World album that followed that. Just a quick note, the episode is no longer available on Roadrunner Records, as you'll hear in the intro. As we were saying, this is an archive episode, and this is an unedited version of that original episode. So go ahead and enjoy this, and thanks again for listening, guys.
You are about to enter the Shockwave Skull Sessions podcast, heard exclusively on RoadrunnerRecords.com/Skull Sessions. And now, here is your host, Bob Nalbandian.
What a great intro. That, of course, is Iron Maiden, the song Passchendaele from their Dance of Death CD. This is part 3, the third episode of the great Iron Maiden debate. Didn't expect it to last 3 episodes, but this will be our final episode of the Iron Maiden discussion, and it goes from when Bruce Dickinson's return on Brave New World on through their most recent CD, A Matter of Life and Death. So we're going to get right to it. Of course, we've got the returning guest, CEO of Metal Blade Records, Brian Slagel, along with our other returning guest, straight from the UK, Mr. Malcolm Doane from Classic Rock Magazine. So we're going to get right to it. This is, of course, the Shockwave Skull Sessions podcast, heard at roadrunnerrecords.com/Skull Sessions. You can also get the Shockwave Skull Sessions on iTunes and several other podcast directories. And you can also check out my sister podcast, the Shockwaves Hard Radio Podcast, both available on iTunes. If you want to send me an email, please send your comments or gripes over to shockwaveskullsessions@gmail.com. All right, let's go ahead and get right into this. This, again, is part 3 of the great Iron Maiden discussion. Enjoy. For those just tuning in now, this is the part 3 of the Iron Maiden discussion. We got our returning guest, Mr. Brian Slagel, CEO of Metal Blade Records, and we got Malcolm Doane.
Hello, Brian. Hello, Bob. Greetings.
Sir Malcolm Doane, shouldn't it be?
Not quite.
Not yet.
Don't crown me yet, or give me a knighthood or anything like that, please.
Well, cool. Well, where we last left off, I believe, on the Blaze Bayley years. We
did.
It's interesting. I wanted to share with you guys. I haven't had a chance to talk to you since we did the second one, but I've got so many great emails from people, and a lot of people totally agreeing with a lot of the stuff. A lot of people saying that we were way too rough on the Blaze Bayley years.
What?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Brian's shocked.
And there were people that just said not only the Blaze Bayley years, but Fear of the Dark and No Prayer of the Dying. They said, we were a little bit too rough, and listen to those albums again and stuff like that. But for the most part, most people agreed. But it's interesting to see the varying opinions. And, it just goes to show you, with bands like Iron Maiden that have that total devoted following, it's almost like Kiss. It's like they can't do no bad. I mean, Gene Simmons could do anything, and a member of the Kiss Army will like it regardless, And it seems Maiden fans are almost that same way. But for the most part, most of the people thought along the same lines we did, but there were those devoted ones that said, wow, you guys are crazy for not liking this album. So
fair play to the fans for having that opinion. And you're right. I mean, fans is short for fanatics, and some people believe that anything that Maiden have done is brilliant because it's been done by Iron Maiden, and fair play for them for thinking that, even if we disagree.
Should we go ahead and start with I guess a Brave New World? Of course, since the Blaze Bayley years, they did Ed Hunter and, the best of. I think that was it. And then they got Bruce right back in the band. Is that correct, Malcolm or Brian?
Well, Bruce and Adrian, let's be honest. It wasn't just Bruce. But it's always fascinating. At the beginning of 1999, when it was announced that Bruce was coming back and Adrian was coming back, the same people who were indifferent almost when Bruce left suddenly were going, it's the revival, it's the resurrection. Iron Maiden are back as they should be. The man who should be fronting the band is right back with them. And let's give credit to whoever was responsible, Rod Smallwood, for persuading A, Steve Harris that Bruce should come back, and B, persuading Bruce that he should come back, because there was a huge division and gulf between the two of them. But realistically, Iron Maiden, where were they going with Blaze? Their career was in the doldrums. I think I'm right in saying, Brian and Bob, that in America, they were doing half-empty clubs on tour. Is that true?
Yeah,
well, pretty much.
In L.A., and they did the Universal Amphitheater, which is about 5,000, which is normally half of what they would normally do at the time. Of course, times have changed then, but still, it wasn't sold out, I don't think, but it was fairly full.
The one with Bruce?
No, the one with Blaze.
Yeah, with Blaze.
Oh, no. I would never, ever in a million years go see Iron Maiden with Blaze Bayley. Like I said last time, I think I heard about 25 seconds of Blaze Bayley with Iron Maiden. It was so hideous to me that I almost wanted to stab my ears out.
Well, I think Steve had no choice. I don't think it didn't take
Well,
much
Steve would
persuasion.
disagree with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think Steve knew that, especially in America. I think the only place that was really accepted for was maybe South America and, maybe certain European countries. But, everywhere else, it was universally. People did not like Blaze Bayley with Iron Maiden.
Well, I think Steve Harris's attitude at the time was that Maiden were as big as they ever were because they were finding more and more countries where they'd never been before that you can go to and do big shows because you'd never been there before. But the traditional Maiden strongholds were dropping.
Yeah, but what I thought was interesting, though, when Bruce and Adrian came back into the band was, I obviously I did not go see any of the Blaze shows. I hadn't seen them for quite some time. And when they first came back, I would guess it was on the Ed Hunter tour, right, Bob?
Yeah, at the Greek Theater.
Yeah. And I thought it was like, wow, they were back and they just hit their stride right away. It was like, nothing, like whatever period of time had lapsed almost didn't lapse, and they were back kind of, even hungrier than, when they kind of finished off with Bruce. Because, once Adrian left, and then obviously the last couple tours with Bruce, you kind of tell it was getting a little old. But when they came back, it seemed very, very refreshing to me, and I was like, wow, this is pretty interesting.
And they were smart too. They did the Ed Hunter, so it was the best of catalog. So they didn't come back doing an entire new album of new material. They came back doing their greatest hits live, which is what they needed to do to get the fans back into the true Iron Maiden sound. And it was a fantastic show. The only thing I didn't like about that show is it was at the Greek Theater, and the Greek has a sound ordinance where you can't play at a certain decibel, and you could actually talk at a regular volume and hear. I mean, it didn't seem like a concert at all. It wasn't loud. It just didn't have that, arena vibe as, their shows at Long Beach Arena.
Yeah, that was a bit of a bummer. But it was nice to see them, back playing that stuff and having those guys be back in the band. I was like, okay, this makes more sense now.
I saw them in Paris when they did September the 9th, 1999, 9999. I think that was certainly the first European show they did with Bruce and Adrian back. It may have been the first show anywhere. And it was an arena show, completely sold out. And the explosion when they came on stage from the fans was so loud, I thought a bomb had gone off. It was such a tremendous feeling of real Maiden are back. And it must have impacted on Steve Harris a lot to think, you know what, yeah, we are back the way we should be. Because for all the differences between Bruce and Steve, we all know that on so many levels they don't connect. There's one way they do connect, Iron Maiden. And Steve hopefully realised at that point there is only one man from the band, Bruce, and Bruce hopefully realised there's only one band I should be in, Maiden.
You know what? One thing I do want to mention, the one thing that strikes me, though, is why they kept both Adrian and Yannick Gears, why they kept Yannick on board. I mean, he is a fantastic guitar player. I loved him with Gillan, I loved him, previously with White Spirit.
White Spirit,
I
yeah.
never thought
White
he
Spirit.
fit in with Maiden, whether it be on those latter records we talked about, or with the Blaze Bayley era, or any era. I mean, live on stage, his guitar work, it was not Maiden at all. And I don't know why. I'm sure there's, a certain amount of devotion to keep him on board, but I just never thought he fit Iron Maiden. And I always thought that, it was kind of ludicrous to have the three guitar players, because it's not like they make use of them like a band like, a jam rock Southern band like a Leonard Skinner or something, where they're all switching off, or even say someone like April Wine, where they really use the three guitar players. I thought the harmonies and everything previously with just Adrian and Dave Murray were a lot better than some of the latter stuff. I don't know. Do you guys agree there? Or?
Well, I have to say, I think Yannick's worked really well. I do disagree. I think he really does fit in with Iron Maiden. And although, let's give credit to the band for having the loyalty to say, we're not throwing him out of the band. He's been there for a while. Why the hell should we get rid of him? Sure. I think they've actually made it work.
I think what bugs more than ever is his stage presence.
Maybe he's a very good soccer player, and they needed to keep him in the band so that he could play, and I'm not sure.
No, I think it works really well with the three guitars. I think they have worked it out. I'm sure there's a lot of the loyalty factor which went into keeping him, and all credit for Maiden for doing that, because that's part of the great spirit of Iron Maiden. They're like Def Leppard, when in a different way with Rick Allen. They could have easily said to Rick Allen when he lost his arm, sorry, we've got to get another drummer in, but they made it work. And I think Maiden were determined, we're not going to throw Yannick out of the band. We want to make it work with him because he is part of this band. And it would have been understandable but a little bit unfair to have said to Yannick, sorry, but Adrian's coming back, bye. And I honestly think they've made it work.
Well, I don't know. I've been pretty outspoken about how my dislike for Yannick on stage and his stage presence, which is definitely not very Iron Maiden, if you ask me, although he's definitely toned it down recently. His guitar playing, I mean, I think he's a good guitar player, but he for some reason, doesn't play guitar very well live sometimes. And so some of his solos are awful. But the biggest problem that I have, and this drives me crazy, and and I love Rod Smallwood. I think he's a brilliant manager and a really, really great guy, and he was really cool to me. So I never brought this up to him. But what drives me insane is and we talked about this, earlier, is my favorite song of all time is Hallowed Be Thy Name. I think, they finish all their sets with Hallowed Be Thy Name. And they have Yannick Gears playing the second solo in that, and he butchers it horrifically every time. And it drives me crazy because the guy that wrote the solo, that played one of the best solos in the entire history of heavy metal, standing right on stage, and yet he's not playing the solo, and that it just drives me insane. Maybe Adrian doesn't like to play the solo, I don't know, but I hate that. It's so bad that I have to actually, during that song, which is my favorite song of all time, I have to turn my head around and close my ears when he does the solo, because I want to kill myself when it happens.
I think Yannick's an easy target. I think a lot of people have had a real go at him unfairly. I think he's a tremendous guitarist. I think he does fit in with Maiden, and I think on stage he works.
Yeah.
A lot of people disagree, I know, but I really think it does.
Well, what I will say is that there definitely are certain songs, where you have the guitar harmonies, and he adds an interesting little harmony element to it, which actually is pretty cool. Like Phantom of the Opera, when they would do that, he played some interesting parts there that kind of filled it out live. So, there are some parts that are pretty good. And, strangely enough, too, well, I guess we'll talk about this momentarily, but of the records that they've done since Bruce has come back, to me, the best songs on those records are actually written by Yannick Gears.
No, he is a good songwriter.
He is a good songwriter.
Yeah. But
very good.
The thing, I don't know, I think with Yannick, he seems more, he's obviously a huge Blackmore fan, very influenced by Blackmore.
Oh, yes.
The stuff he's done with Gillan and White Spirit, it's just been him as a single guitar player with a keyboard player, which I think he works brilliantly with. I mean, some of the Gillan albums he did were just fantastic. I mean, some of the most underrated records were some of the Gillan records, and plus the ones with Bernie Tormé as well. But Maiden, it just was. I just didn't think that there was anything special about him. I mean, just to me personally, it's like, here's this brilliant guitar player, and he's just kind of following along with stuff that Maiden's always done. And I mean, you would almost want to give the keyboardist of Maiden, who's behind the stage, who's not an official member of the band, really in the last few records, he's been a lot more predominant, I think, than Yannick has.
Well, maybe one thing I will say is maybe he takes these guys as they're getting older and they're doing this stuff live, maybe it has a little bit of a safety net there where, there's 3 guitar players now, and maybe that makes it a little easier for everybody, takes the pressure off to some degree. I could kind of see how that might work a little bit.
Right. Well, anyway, let's get on to, I guess, we'll just start with A Brave New World.
Brave New World, yeah.
Yeah, we'll start with...
And speaking of Yannick Gears, Out of the Silent Planet is my favorite
song
on that record, which was written by Yannick Gears.
Yep. It's one of those songs that Bruce, Steve, and Yannick, I mean, Bruce and Steve writing together, it's not exactly prevalent in Iron Maiden, but those two co-wrote it with Yannick, didn't they?
Yeah, so, and it's a great song. Also, it's a great King's X reference too there, but
I think Brave New World was such a storming comeback and an affirmation of we're not a nostalgia band. It was a great quote. Actually, I mean, it was a quote from Yannick that Bruce picked up on, and it's become attributed to Bruce, is that we are not here for you to live your youth or relive your youth. In other words, we're not a nostalgia band. We have something more to offer in the 21st century. And to come up with an album like Brave New World really affirmed the fact that Maiden were about moving forward and not just going on tour and playing all the greatest hits for everybody who wanted to remember the early or to mid-80s. And it also moved them on. Sorry, go on.
You're right. It's a really solid record. I mean, Ghost of the Navigator is a great song. Brave New World, Mercenary Dreamer. I mean, there's a lot of really good tracks on that record.
Absolutely. And it was a much more progressive record as well. It was Maiden picking up on the progressive area that they always explored in the 80s and really taking it on from there. And of course, The Wicker Man, which is a great single in its own right. But a lot of those songs are quite lengthy and deserve to be long as well. They weren't long for the sake of being long passages and pieces. These were extended musical journeys, and it really worked as a record.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. My only little thing that I will nitpick a little bit on it is that I thought the production wasn't as strong as it could have been. I mean, I thought it was a little too much bass guitar there, not enough rhythm guitar. So they had 3 guitar players, and there's some parts you couldn't really hear all that loud. But I mean, aside from that, I think it was a really good record, and definitely, as a Maiden fan, everybody's, especially me, I'm always very skeptical about, these older bands coming back and doing new records. Kiss has done that, and it hasn't worked out so well. And but this was a really good, solid record that I think, most Maiden fans thought was like, hey, this is a real cool Iron Maiden record.
Well, I think for me, the production was almost a relief because we had so many productions from the mid-90s onwards where Steve pretty much had been in charge. And I thought those productions really, shall we say, unbalanced. At least this one had a lot more balance to it.
A little bit, but I do notice that the subsequent records definitely were a little more guitar-oriented. This one seemed to be still a little too much. I mean, hey, look, Steve Harris is one of the greatest bass players of all time, but there's still just a little too much bass guitar and not quite enough rhythm guitar in that. But like I said, it's a small thing. Otherwise, I think it's a really, really strong record.
Well, put this way, Kevin Shirley's great, but he's no Martin Birch, that's for sure.
No, of course he isn't. But at that point, Martin had retired anyway.
Right.
But I think the fact that they actually had a decent producer in there with Steve in the studio was a massive step forward, thankfully.
At that point, I was kind of disappointed with the previous Maiden records. I think I expected too much, with Bruce coming back, Bruce and Adrian coming back, because I remember the first Impact, I wasn't that crazy about it. I'm still not, I mean, I like it. It's definitely not one of my favorites. It doesn't compare to their earlier releases by any means, but, I definitely prefer it over to, Fear of the Dark and No Prayer. But, it's funny, I think you were talking about Malcolm, sometimes when you're a press person and you go in and the record company plays you the tracks and you do a review from that. And it was interesting. I did a interview with Bruce Dickinson, and it was prior to the record being released. And of course, they were real tight, and Sanctuary was real tight about, not getting advance copies out. So prior to the interview, we met at Sony Records. They put you in a room and they play the 4 songs. I think it was actually the first 4 sons. Worker Man,
Right.
Ghost of the Navigator, Brave New World, and Blood Brothers, I believe. And after listening to the 4 songs, I mentioned to Bruce, I said, wow, when I first heard the opening of Wicker Man, I thought you were covering Running Wild by Judas Priest. Which was a stupid thing to say right off the bat. He's kind of like, geez, I just got back. Some guy from England had said the same thing. We never even heard that. So, I wasn't like accusing him of ripping it off. I just, happened to mention it.
This is a much more general point, and I think I've made it before. What possesses a band, a manager, and a record label to think, after all the work and effort that goes into making an album as good as possible, that you then throw it away by saying to whoever, you've got an hour to listen to it, without actually involving yourself in the record the way that Maiden's records demand you do. It's insulting to what you've done as a band then to do that. It's daft. How can you be expected?
You can't do it.
It's an insult to the music and to the band, but it's an insult the band bring on themselves. And up to this day, I know all the paranoia about downloads, the paranoia about leaks, etc. But come on, if you put that much effort, that much thought into a record, and are that proud of it, why on earth throw it all away by expecting somebody to go in and spend 1, maybe 2 listens and then to write a review? It's ridiculous, quite honestly.
Yeah, it's difficult these days because you do have to worry about those sort of things. But I think, technology, I mean, speaking now with my little record company hat on, the technology has come a long way now where, now it's, you can do digital downloads with watermarking so you know who has it. So if it does get leaked, you know exactly where it came from. And I mean, look, Iron Maiden is obviously a much bigger entity than anything that I'm dealing with. But, and there's enough people out there that know how to, get the stuff and not let it leak out, that you can do that a little bit more than you can. But I think back then the people were just so paranoid about giving out CD copies and these other things where you didn't have them watermarked and all this sort of stuff. But I agree, it's especially a record like that. I remember when I first listened to it, I liked it, but it took a while to really get through it because there's so much stuff going on there. There is with any Maiden record. But I would definitely say, though, from my perspective, that I thought Brave New World was probably the best Maiden record since Seventh Son of Seventh Son.
I'd agree with you, absolutely. It was a really strong comeback
too, which isn't saying a whole lot, but I do agree.
No, I think it actually is a strong record in its own right. But yeah, it is a record you'd hope would follow Seventh Son, and let's forget about everything else that came after Seventh Son before Brave New World. That's really what it was.
Exactly.
And what about the tours? Since we got a little time, you saw that tour. What did you think of the Brave New? Now on the Brave New World tour, they came out and did pretty much that whole record too, right?
Yep. I think that's what they've been doing since the return of Adrian and Bruce. They're doing tours. One tour will be a nostalgia tour, for want of a better description, where they are doing a lot of old stuff. And then they'll come back and do another tour and say, right, this tour is going to concentrate on our new record. And nothing wrong with that. And they've always been very open about it. So if you want the nostalgia tour, it's there for you to go to. If you don't want to hear the new record, fine, just don't go to that tour. But they've always done that. Even in the early days, they always were proud enough of their records to say we're going to do a lot of the current album on this tour. And that's what they did with the Brave New World tour. I thought it worked very well.
And the songs did go over live, especially the title track. Great live song.
Mm.
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool. They're giving, they're really, doing a good job of giving the fans what they want. With, we'll go out, we'll put a new record out, we'll go out, we'll play most of that and, a few of the hits, and then we'll come back and we'll play a whole, hits tour to make everybody else happy. And I kind of like that, back and forth, because it is disappointing when, especially, bands later in their career, when they do put out a decent record, you want to hear more of the stuff live, and they'll maybe sprinkle in, 1 or 2 or 3 tracks, and that's, pretty much all you really get to hear. So I actually like the fact that they'll go out and play the whole record live. I know people were, especially when this came out and this tour happened, a lot of people were complaining about it because they weren't aware of what the future held in terms of Maiden, going back and playing more of the old stuff as time went on. But I thought it was a cool tour. I enjoyed it. I thought it was good.
Well, it's funny how they'll do the studio record and sandwich it between greatest hit records and live records. Like, they did the Ed Hunter, they came back and did the greatest hits. then they do a Brave New World, then they come back and do a live record, Rock in Rio, and
That's right,
another
yep.
greatest hits record, Edward the Great, and come back and tour, do the greatest hits.
Yep.
Interesting. We don't need to really touch on the live records. I mean, we already touched on, the main live records, unless there's anything in particular you want to say about Rock in Rio.
Well, the one thing
I mean, there's so many of these that they put out. There's the Live at Donington and the Rock in Rio, and so many of these live albums. And it was almost just hey, here's a really good performance that we thought was cool. Let's share with everybody, and that's fine.
I think the one thing they did do is because they put the clairvoyance into the Rock in Rio set, and it suddenly showed what a great song that was, sung by Bruce.
Oh yeah,
because it wasn't the Blaze here, and you heard it with the Klansman, not the Clairvoyant, the Klansman. I'm thinking of
the
Klansman. Yeah, CL thing. But then the Klansman, which obviously came from the Blaze era, and when it was done by Blazers, yeah, it's all right. But when it was suddenly done by Bruce, it really came alive. So it's the one thing that came through from Rock in Rio, I think, was a song like the Klansman was actually very strong indeed.
I agree.
Yeah, and it shows you how good a singer Bruce is that he could take that horrible vocal that happened before on it and make it better.
Yes, you're right. Absolutely.
Well, the Beast Over Hammersmith. Were you at that show when they recorded that, Malcolm?
Yep, yeah. I was indeed. Are you talking about the Hammersmith when they did the first 4 albums, or?
Sorry, were you talking about the Beast Over Hammersmith, the 1982 show?
Yeah, that one. Yeah, absolutely.
Didn't that come out not too long ago?
Sorry, I was
going to say that's part of that metal box that they had.
Yes, that's right. Yes,
that was out, but it was in there, and they had a bunch of rarities, and they had they had fun, I guess, gotten the original tape from that show, which I have that on a horrible bootleg video quality. This is terrible, but that to me, was one of the better shows, of all time. And if Malcolm was there, I might hang up.
Yeah, I was.
Yeah.
So goodbye, Brian. Yeah, I was there. I mean, it was great to see that sort of thing come out. It was part of what so many bands are doing these days is they're going back, trawling through so many tapes they've got in the vaults and saying, people want to hear it, why don't we put them out? And it was a tremendous show. Only in retrospect, at the time, we didn't realize the historic value of it. But, of course, now everybody does.
So, shall we move on to Dance of Death?
Yeah.
Sure.
You want to start that out, Malcolm?
Dance of Death, again, I thought was a really good record. Full of songs that were developed and allowed to breathe, as it were, to be as long as they needed to be, including Wildest Dreams. Obviously, it wasn't a long song, but it was a great way to open the record. Rainmaker. I really was impressed with that record. I think it continued the good work from Brave New World, albeit in retrospect, I don't think it's quite as good as Brave New World. I don't know if Brian would agree with that.
Yeah, I think the Brave New World was pretty consistent. Like I felt that every song on there was really good. And Dance of Death, I think it's also a very, very good record. Which some songs like No More Lies, kind of those middle 3 or 4 tracks, No More Lies, Montsegur, I think it was, and Dance of Death, and then Gates of Tomorrow. Those 4 middle ones, I love those songs. Passchendaele's a good song too.
Passchendaele is a great Maiden moment.
Another epic, Passchendaele, absolutely.
Passchendaele's one of those great Maiden moments. I think one of those great Maiden epics. They do brilliantly, and passion was what it was all about. Really, there was a passion about Passchendaele.
But those middle songs on Dance of Death, I thought were really, really, really strong. And some of the others maybe weren't as strong, but I still think it was a really good, again, a really good kind of Maiden Mach 2 era, whatever you want to call it, record. But I liked a strong record. I enjoyed listening to it. Probably my favorite song up there is No More Lies. Dickinson on that song is just phenomenal.
It's a superb record. It's a superb track. Rainmaker is very good as well. And in Journeyman, I think that's the last track on the album. Yeah. I mean, that's a little underrated, but it's a very powerful, lengthy song, which proves Maiden's ability to say, let's make it as long as it needs to be, rather than either wrap it up in 3 or 4 minutes or stretch it out way beyond where it should be. And I think that's one of Maiden's strengths when they're on form, is to allow a song the length it needs to be, whatever that length might happen to end up being.
See, I didn't care for the production on this one that much. I thought it was a little bit too muddy. It just didn't. It just wasn't bright, and really, it just sounded dull to me.
But see, I actually like the production on this better than Brave New World, actually, because they're a little more guitar-oriented than Brave New World was. But I still thought it sounded fine. I didn't have a real big problem with the production.
No, I think actually it was Kevin Shirley and Steve Harris getting to grips with working together, and I think the production, for me, was better than Brave New World. I'd agree with you, Brian.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
maybe Bob doesn't have a very good stereo.
maybe. I got to give it a few more listens, I guess. But Passchendaele, I think that's a true Iron Maiden epic.
Wonderful song.
Great, very underrated song. Again, very, very progressive. A little bit too progressive for my taste. I think, I do like the opening track. It's short for Maiden, 4 minutes. To the point, and kind of a Rainmaker's good. It's got some good songs on it. Again, I just don't think they really recaptured the true magic of their earlier days. Maybe it's just me being spoiled. I think, Brian, you had mentioned in a previous episode, you're never going to get, there's a magical moment in time, like, when Metallica did Ride the Lightning or Master of Puppets, or when Saxon did Wheels of Steel or Strong Arm. You're not going to really capture that moment again. For some reason, I always thought Maiden could, and I just thought they just leaned way too progressive. They just kind of changed their flavor too much for me. 3 or 4 songs is fine, but a whole album. I know a lot of the prog metal fans love it, but for me, I just thought they just leaned way too much toward the prog metal end.
I think you do have to be a hardcore Maiden fan to be into the stuff that's coming out now. It's not. I mean, look, I think they realize we're not going to be a mainstream band. We don't really care. We're going to do what we want to do. And, again, they're older guys who've been around a long time. The anger, fire, passion, while it's there, probably isn't there as much as it was in the early days. Like I said before, it's almost impossible to kind of recreate that. But, they're aging very well. Certainly live-wise. I think we talked about this in one of the other earlier installments, but they might be better live now than they were back in their heyday. And I mentioned that to Rod Smallwood once, and he said they're much better now. I said, I think you might be right. I mean, they are pretty good. Like Bruce, Bruce is more consistent now. I mean, in the old, especially when he first came back, there were some times where he wouldn't maybe be as good every single night because he would go to so many shows. But these last few tours, he's right on every single night, no problems.
Oh, absolutely. Yep. He's one of those singers that have still, like Rob Halford and like Ronnie James Dio, just phenomenal.
Oh, yeah.
And keep his voice down to some
as age has gone on, there are very few of the great singers who've managed to retain their voices. Bruce is one of them, and you mentioned Rob and Ronnie, 2 others. There are very few of those singers around who have reached the heights and continue at that level and don't drop their standards. And Bruce certainly fits into that category. But the one thing I think, Bob, we should point out, I don't think Maiden were trying to recapture what they were. They've moved on.
True. And which I admire for that. And I mean, the thing about Maiden, and this is a point I know on a previous episode, I think Brian had mentioned about how important management is, and obviously the fact that they had Rod Smallwood really helped their longevity and made them as powerful as they are today with that muscle behind them. But you really got to give credit to the band and their focus, and not just their live shows, but their albums in creating something different on every record. I do give them that, even though it's not particularly my cup of tea. But it's interesting because you look at all the bands from the new wave of British heavy metal era that put out those classic debut albums, Angel Witch, Diamond Head, Tigers of Pantang with Wildcats. They could never follow it up like Maiden did, and that was a problem with. I mean, Tigers did Spellbound, which was a great record, but from there, it's like they branched out. It seems like they all tried to cater to the American market or whatever. They lost their focus. That's something you really got to give credit to Steve Harris. He had that focus, and we had talked about in the previous episode is his stubbornness to do things the way he wanted. And absolutely. I always think it's so interesting is the bands like Iron Maiden and Metallica, who most people thought would never be mainstream. They're never going to get the radio. They're never going to get this and that. They're the bands that have lasted longer than all these 80s, hair metal bands or whatever.
Because it's real. Like they're doing stuff that's real. It's not, manufactured or, they're doing it for real, real music, and they've touched a lot of people who are, into it as much as they are. It's a real organic thing, and there aren't very many bands that have that that connection with the fans like they do.
No.
And they appreciate that, and they work hard to make sure that they keep that up. And
plus they're very strategic in how they do everything. And I think it's not just on the management end. I think, songwriting wise for everything. I mean, you could take a band like Motorhead that really has never lost their focus, but the last 5 or 6 albums they've done are, very similar. It's nothing new, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, they've had some highlights here and there, but Maiden's always been able to elevate to the next level. You know what I mean? And I think it is from constant touring and the way they, like I said, push it down your throat, because they are the most unmarketable band when it comes to like, if you really think about it. I mean, all their songs pretty much are over 5 minutes long, and they're all very progressive. It's almost like a band like Rush or something like that. And there's not very many bands in this era from the 80s on that have been able to maintain that. Sure, in the 70s it was the norm, but for a band to continue that kind of a structure and in this day and age is pretty amazing. And be
phenomenal musicians who keep growing,
And I think they've always made the record they want to make, and then have branched out from there. They've always gone into the studio to write the records and record the records that they want to do without any interference from anybody else. And then it's down to the marketing campaigns and the publicity campaigns to promote as much as possible. However, musically, it's very true to, I think, any one member of that band can look anyone in the eye and say, the albums we make, that's what we wanted to do. It wasn't ever done in terms of we need a hit single, we need to move on to another level. It's, this is the music we make, end of.
Yep,
right.
And that's ultimately every single hugely successful band has that same thing. They make albums that they want to make, that they like, and lucky enough everybody else hears it, but they stay true to themselves. And, a lot of those other bands you mentioned before, Bob, that kind of went to the wayside, they didn't stay true to themselves. They got caught up in trying to be something that everybody else wanted, and they didn't just do what they should have done.
And that's a tough thing, especially from the early 80s, as Brian and I'm sure Malcolm, the pressure you had from the record companies to try to become big in America and be on MTV and be on the radio. And to resist that is very admirable, because so many bands gave in, because a lot of times it was either you do that or the record company drops you.
Yes,
but
that's true.
They were so good live, too. I mean, that's the other big factor that we talked a lot about. But, I mean, that's the other thing, is they're so good live, and they always have been so good live, except for those lost years that we won't talk about any further with that other guy singing. But, they've been a phenomenal live band, and that keeps them going, and that keeps them popular because people want to see them live, and that, makes their longevity there.
Absolutely, and they've always been a tremendous live band. And let's not forget the Eddie factor. Eddie has been such a great image for them down the decades, and still retains that fascination for people. And it helped to market the band. And a band who, let's face it, visually, when you see the photos and the scowling, arms folded photos aren't exactly riveting. But when you've got that Eddie image as well as the marketing tool, anything's possible. And they are, I think now, with all due respect to Sabbath, the most loved metal band in the world.
Well, them and Metallica, probably. It's definitely neck and neck.
I think Maiden are slightly ahead of Metallica in terms of the huge affection the fans feel. I'm not putting Metallica down, because obviously they're right up there as well, but somehow I think Maiden just have the edge in that respect. It's the most loved metal band in the world. Not necessarily the biggest metal band in the world, because I think Metallica might just have the edge there, but in terms of the affection the fans feel, there's a devotion to Maiden that perhaps even Metallica can't quite match. I think there's that tremendous love for Maiden that's come through now more than it's ever been, in a strange way. That makes them more popular than they've ever been in their history. And more power to them for that, because bands who come back, I mean, Maiden didn't reform, there was a reunification, shall we say, don't necessarily tend to retain the enthusiasm and passion of the fans beyond the initial explosion, and then people get a little bored, and the legend starts to get tarnished, as we've seen over the years. But with Maiden, it's got bigger.
But again, like Brian says, it goes back to their live shows and keeping people entertained, and
always maintain. It have always been true to the fans.
Yes,
they've never undersold the fans. Whatever they've done has been of the highest value, and that goes right back to the end of the 70s. They've always done everything to make sure that the fans got value for money. And you're right, live shows certainly is part of that.
Well, let's end off with A Matter of Life and Death, their last, or I should say most recently released studio record. You want to start that one out, Malcolm?
To me, and people may disagree, I think it's the best album they've done since Number of the Beast. I thought that was an absolutely tremendous record that brought together the progressive side, the power side. Every song on there works. I mean, These Colors Don't Run has become inspirational and almost an anthem. It's just a tremendous bringing together of all the elements that you heard in Brave New World and Dance of Death. They really came to their fruition on A Matter of Life and Death, including the production. And I really think it's the best thing they've done since Number of the Beast. So then if Brown would be shocked by that.
Well, mildly shocked by that. I do think it's a very, very good record, and there's, again, some really, really great songs. Like you said, These Colors Don't Run is great. Like, I love Brighter Than a Thousand Suns.
Yeah, The Longest Day.
The Good of God. And it's good. The only thing I'll say about it, though, is it and I do like the record a lot. It's definitely, arguably the best of the three, later versions and stuff. I definitely wouldn't say it's the best in Number of the Beast, but the only thing I'll say, though, is that it is that some of the songwriting gets a little predictable, and that they start out with a little little melodic beginning, and then it gets heavy, and that kind of was like, okay, I mean, I like it, but like every song now is like that. Whatever 80% of the record is kind of like that. That's my only little blip on it, that it gets a little predictable like that. But otherwise, I think it's a really good, solid record. There's some really, really good songs on there. I get some good Yannick Gear songs also. So another very solid Mach 2, shall we say, Iron Maiden record.
Yeah. And it's got another Dave Murray co-write, hasn't it? Reincarnation of Benjamin Brieg. Rare to see Dave Murray co-write.
10 years he does one?
Yeah, it's something like that.
Great tune, though. Great song.
And I personally love that record. I think it's a tremendous album. And I wouldn't say it's the highlight of Mark II, because hopefully that's still to come. I mean, it's interesting we're calling it Mark II, but whatever. But I really was impressed with that record, and I think they came into their own in terms of really pushing forward. It's a progressive metal album and a template for so much that's strangely come since. I think a lot of bands have been influenced to some extent by what Maiden have done, even if it's a case of we can write long songs and let them breathe. And a lot of bands are doing that these days, and more power to them for having that ability now to explore musicality rather than feeling everything should be wrapped up in 4 minutes. Sometimes it should be. I'm not saying every song should be 8 or 9 minutes long, but I think what Maiden have done is almost make it acceptable for bands to try and be a little bit more musically adventurous.
Yeah, I think if you can do it well, why not? That's it's always a big risk. The longer the song is, the bigger the risk is, because if you don't have something interesting going on, it can get boring. But I mean, I'm a big fan of long songs too, and I don't get any of these really long songs in the last few Maiden records. I don't really get bored. I like the longer ones. I think I find the more interesting ones, because they take these little twists and turns, and that stuff is pretty cool. Like I said, I'm a little burnt out on the melodic beginnings, but other than that, I do really like all that stuff. It's very interesting.
I think they have certain songs that are epic, and they usually put them toward the end of the records on the last three we talked about, but it seems like they treat every song as if it's an epic. And it seems like I think that what bugs me about their sound has become so progressive, and they've concentrated so much on not following a formula sound that they've become formulated.
I know what you mean.
On this record. And Brian said it well. Every song kind of starts out the same. It starts out real slow and a melodic thing, and then builds up, and they're 8 or 9, 10 minutes long, and it seems like they've tried so hard to be not formulated that on this album it really sounds formulated.
You see, I disagree. I don't think it does sound formula.
Yeah, I don't know that they set out to specifically do it this way. It just seemed to me that they have a lot of interesting ideas, and like I said, I don't get bored with any of these really long songs. I like the rhythms, and they've kind of, because they've been developing this style for so long, and they've kind of found themselves in this really nice groove where it's like there's so many, and there's also a lot of songwriters now in the band too. where there's a lot more ideas happening there. You put a guy like Yannick Gears in, who, for all of his shortcomings at times live, is a phenomenal songwriter. And, some of the better songs in this era of Iron Maiden have been ones that he's written. And he's got a lot of great ideas and great melodies and stuff in there, too. So you have so many people coming with a lot of stuff that, it kind of makes sense that there's a lot of really long songs on these records, just because there's so many ideas, and why waste them? Get them out there. If it's working, it's working.
I know what you're saying, and if it's I guess now they've made it clear that they are kind of a progressive band, so to speak, and I think Steve Harris. His influence has really come true in the bands, we had talked about being really into Yes and all that kind of stuff, and creating albums like that, which I just prefer so much. When you go back to Number of the Beast and even Killers and some of the songs before, there was so much more diversity. You'd have a short song, or you could have a song like a Runnin' Free, and then do like an epic song like Phantom of the Opera. This album is a great album if you just could relax and just want to hear some great progressive metal music. It's almost like headphone music in a sense. I notice when you do hear it on the headphones, and you hear a lot of different stuff in there. There's a lot of stuff going on production wise, but I never looked at Maiden as like that. I like the earlier classic Maiden, where every song was kind of different and it made into a great album, and that's what was so.
Bob, it's not 1983 anymore. I'm sorry.
I know, but you know what? I don't think the time has to do with that. I mean, it's great that the band moved on, but I think they could still do a song like, say, Can I Play With Madness or something.
Or Different World, which is on the matter of life and death. They did do that. And who knows, knowing Maiden, they'll go and do exactly that in the next record.
Yeah,
who knows?
Maybe the next Maiden record will be all like 2 or 3 minute long songs. You never know.
Yeah,
see, I didn't
never know with them.
I thought that was such a poor opener. I heard it and it's like I don't know. I just didn't get that one.
What, Different World?
Yeah.
Also,
as an opener,
you also have to realize too that there's no more time constraints. You don't. A band like Maiden that started out in the vinyl era. You don't have time constraints now anymore. Even you could put 80 minutes on a CD.
Well, that's my point. I think they're trying too hard to do that, and I think for the epic songs.
It doesn't feel or sound forced to me. It's like I would be the first to admit that if it felt forced, like, okay, we're trying to make every song be 10 minutes long and interesting. It doesn't sound forced. It just sounds like this is what they're doing, and I think the longer songs, to me, are the most interesting songs on these records. I'm not a real big fan of the shorter ones. I like the 8, 9, 10-minute long songs. I think that they're the more interesting ones of what they're writing in these days, instead of the shorter ones.
I fully agree. I don't think they're trying to write 8 or 9 minute songs. I think this is the way the songs come out because of the way they're structured. And I'm sure that Maiden probably think, good grief, how many long songs have we got on this record? Wow. I'm sure they're not sitting down saying every song has to be at least 7 minutes long. So they're not anti-formula by being anti-formula. I think this is the way they're coming out. And there is, of course, a strength and weakness in the CD and the iTunes generation. It's now length of songs and number of songs on a record aren't a problem. And you can get lost in that. And too many bands do say, we can do 14-song records when they should be 8-song records. Sure. But I don't think Maiden fit into that. I think Maiden are doing what the music dictates they should be doing. And I think in that respect, they're coming up with very strong material.
Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of songs I really like on this record. Songs that you had mentioned, Reincarnation of Benjamin Bragg, I like. For the Greater Good of God, I think is a great song. Brighter Than 1,000 Suns, you had mentioned, another great song. The Longest Day, that's a good song.
Yes.
Some of the others, it's again, I haven't given it a lot of listens, and Maiden's one of those bands you really got to listen to. Who knows? Maybe a few months from now, it's going to be my favorite record. I don't know, but I definitely haven't given the latter records the listens like I have the earlier records. So that could be too. So maybe I got to go back and give it a few more spins. So.
Well, I think these are records that the current albums Maiden have been making are records you have to live with. I think you have to listen to them in their entirety. You can't cherry-pick tracks and say, 3 or 4 tracks are really good and I'll just listen to those. I think as entities, as albums, they stand out. And I think that's the beauty of what Maiden are now doing, is saying, we're not actually making this easy for anybody, but if you listen, the reward is there.
Yeah, you have to give it a lot of time. There's a lot of stuff going on that you have to digest, which has always been the case with Maiden through their whole career, and especially now when there's even more stuff to digest. It definitely takes a while, but if you can stick with it, there's a lot of good stuff, I think, on these records.
Yeah,
I think that's the one complaint is that, some people can't stick with it, especially in this, this day and age when people want everything real quick. But,
people want to cherry pick. I'll pick 3 tracks from an album, put it on my iPod or whatever. I mean, personally, I think iPods have ruined albums because it allows people to just say, I'll just take a couple of tracks that you like. And I think a band like Maiden, the album deserves to have your attention. And you can put it on as background music as well, but I think there's so much reward to be gained from listening to it. And it goes back to that 70s era when bands made albums where you did go from side 1, track 1, to side 2, track 8 or 9, and every track was worth listening to as a whole. And that's what Maiden are doing, I think. They're making albums. Right. So in that respect, they're being old-fashioned, and thank goodness for that.
Yeah, which is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do respect them for that. I do respect Steve Harris for that. Again, it's doing what they want to do, which I think is great. It's just, again, I like a lot of the progressive rock, but I prefer Maiden as, the Number of the Beast era Maiden, personally.
Well, fair enough. And, of course, Number of the Beast is there. Yeah. So you can go back and revisit that. And their catalogue is there. So people who say they prefer the Diana era.
I don't think those albums sound dated. I mean, you listen to a lot of old bands' catalogs from 1983 or stuff, you go, wow, this is really dated stuff. You listen to some of the earlier Maiden records, it still sounds as fresh today as, and I'm not saying they should go back and recreate that, but that kind of mentality, and that kind of vibe. Yeah.
Well, you're right. And Maiden don't sound dated. What they did in the early 80s, what they did with Diana stands up still today. And what they did in the early days with Bruce absolutely stands up. And what they're doing now stands up. I think they are one of those very few bands whose career is on such a high so consistently. And it's something that they should be proud of. They've always done it their way. And their way has been what the fans want, and increasing numbers of fans.
And they're arguably bigger now than they ever have been before.
Absolutely.
They're playing to more people and drawing more people. This last, I think we talked about this the last time too. This last tour they did in the States was the biggest tour they've ever done here, ever in their whole history. So I think that it's partially that they're performing great live, but also they're still putting out consistently good product even on these new records. And here you have it, that's bigger than they've ever been.
I think people know they're kind of the last of a dying breed because there's not many arena bands left out there. And Maiden's really the youngest of them all. I mean, you have, the Black Sabbath, the Judas Priest, and, you got Metallica, of course.
Yeah.
But apart from Metallica, really consistently playing arenas, selling out, without having to be on a package bill. Who else do you have but Iron Maiden out there? And
that's another podcast, I think, but there is a real fear now. What happens when the greats we've taken for granted for 30 or 40 years finally retire? Who takes over? Where are they?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Where are the young bands coming through who are going to be the next Maiden, the next Metallica? They don't exist, sadly, and that's a real worry.
Well, it comes down to the live show, and that's, what you're talking about, the way the industry is, with the iPods and everything else. It's all about, easy access to music, and where bands don't have to concentrate live. I mean, you could go into a studio and do everything Pro Tools, where being a live band is secondary now, where, of course,
everything's very fragmented, too. I mean, look, I think that the metal scene right now is probably bigger overall than it's ever been, but there's way more bands. There's tons and tons of bands that are really big. There's not like one or two bands that everybody kind of fixates on, like when Metallica happened or Iron Maiden. There's not like somebody that they can really hand the baton. Instead of Maiden and Metallica handing the baton to one band, they're really handing it to about 30 bands.
Yeah.
They may collectively be as big or bigger than Maiden was as a whole, but there's not one singular arena-style band that's going to sell 3 or 4 million records. But that's just the way the music business is now in general, where I think these scenes are really big, and there's a lot of really big bands. I mean, look, as an independent label myself, we have more bands now selling more records than we ever have, but, you don't have the big, gigantic, multi-bazillion selling stuff, but you have a lot of, very good, consistent, good-selling bands.
True.
No, I think you're absolutely right, although I still feel and I don't know who it'll be, but in the next 2 or 3 years, there will be a young band who will come through, because I just kept this feeling, who will capture the imagination and will just take off. I can't tell you why I think that. Certainly don't know who it is going to be, but I think it's going to happen. It's the way metal tends to be. But I think metal now, you're right, it's bigger than it's ever been, except right now we don't have a young band who can say, they're the next Metallica or the next Maiden. And we haven't had that for a long time. But in terms of talent out there, and bands who've been influenced by the likes of Maiden, there's loads of ability, lots of exciting records being made, but it's so fragmented. Brian's totally right. But the scene will throw up a big name, I reckon. It has to.
I hope so. I hope you're right.
Yeah. Because otherwise, where do the festivals go? Where do the arenas go? Because we won't have the likes of a young Priest or a young Sabbath or a young Maiden or a young Metallica coming through. So who's going to take over? And you do need a big name to capture the imagination, the zeitgeist, if you want, spirit of the age, a new generation. And it will happen, but I don't know where, I don't know who, but I think it will definitely take place. Maybe I'm just being naive and have put in faith too much as a fan in it going on, but at least we still have Maiden, thankfully.
True. And to end this, I do want to touch up on, I don't want to go through all the DVDs, their live concert DVDs they've done, but I think we should mention about Flight 666.
Yeah, it's a very good film.
It was a brilliant DVD by Sam Dunn. And the fact that, again, talking about how strategic Maiden is, they never catered to the bullshit of reality shows, or doing the Aussie thing, or doing any of this kind of stuff.
Or doing the Metallica thing, some kind of monster.
Yeah, or doing that. They did a documentary that suits them, that is respectable, and it basically, it is Iron Maiden. It is, without being dramatic.
I think it is who they are, and they also picked the right guys to do it. Sure. Sam Dunn and his crew do a great job, and they're huge fans, and they went out to do something, just kind of capture the whole thing. But it is cool that Maiden said, "Hey, come out and film the whole thing and capture this whole little shot that they were doing." It was kind of somewhat groundbreaking what they were doing. Going and flying themselves to all these different gigs, and the shows were so great. And seeing what happened in South America with those kids crying and all that stuff is. That's extremely powerful stuff. And it's a phenomenal movie, and as much as I love the movie, I also love the other disc. It's just the show straight through, which is also shows you how good they are playing now as a band as well.
And they did a thing. I don't know if it's on a bonus DVD or something, but I've actually seen it on IFC where they just play in a rehearsal studio, and it's brilliant. Wow. Have you seen that?
No, not seen that, but
yeah, I saw it on IFC. I think they do a series of these, and I was just flipping through channels, and I saw Maiden, and it just shows them rehearsing, and it's absolutely brilliant.
Sure, it would be.
Put it on YouTube or something; it'll come out.
Okay.
But, great stuff. But yeah, as far as a Flight 666, I think just shows how Maiden is still an underground band in a way, because so many people know how huge Metallica is, even if you're not into metal. But people that aren't into metal that have seen Flight 66 freak out going, "Oh my God, I never knew Iron Maiden was that big." They are literally, I think, one of the biggest bands in the world.
Absolutely.
Well, and that's the exception of America that doesn't know how big they are. Everybody else does, trust me.
It's respectful to their heritage. It gives you an insight into what it's like to be on that tour. But it keeps at arm's length all the sensationalism, all the intricacies of personal detail that they don't want exposed to public ridicule or into the public domain. You can say what you like about Some Kind of Monster, which for me was a brave move by Metallica, but thoroughly embarrassed them. Maiden would never put themselves in that position. This is a great road movie about what it's like to be on the road with Iron Maiden as a band, rather than as getting the personal insight into the sensationalism or anything else which goes on. And you're right, it was made by two people who love and understand Maiden and respected their boundaries.
Exactly. Well said. What else? Anything before we close?
Well, I think it's been great to actually reminisce about one of the great bands. Not just one of the great metal bands, one of the great bands. Doesn't matter what genre you're in, there are very few who are as good at what they do as Maiden always have been and hopefully always will be.
Absolutely. Brian?
Yeah, I can. All I can say is I concur completely with what Malcolm just said. I can't say any better.
Well, I think this Iron Maiden episode definitely deserved the 3 episodes that were given.
They're about to do
there's
that.
just so
I
much
thought it was
to
going to
say.
be 10 episodes. What happened?
We could do it.
Yeah, let's go back and do it all over again.
I think at this point everyone's going to get sick of it. But I got to say, people have really loved these Maiden ones. So I'm sure they'll love this one equally. And I'm sure we'll get a lot of feedback of people saying that we're crazy.
I hope so.
Particularly me, I think, because
Well, everybody's crazy in some way. And it's always nice when you get people who are passionate, whether they agree or disagree, because it's nice to have that feedback. Definitely.
Absolutely. Well, guys, it has been an absolute pleasure, and we're going to get you both back on another topic. And, the one you had mentioned, Malcolm, that was something I've actually thought about doing too, and that's something real interesting.
Absolutely. I'm up for that, definitely.
Cool. Well,
Lovely.
gentlemen.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
All right.
It's been great
Bye-bye.
talking about Maiden.
Bye, Brian.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It's been a lot.
Thank you.
That was, of course, the great Iron Maiden discussion with Metal Blade CEO Brian Slagel and the great Malcolm Dome from Classic Rock Magazine. Many thanks to both Brian and Malcolm for our great grand finale of the Part 3 Iron Maiden discussion. Thanks again to you guys for checking out another episode of the Shockwave Skull Sessions podcast. Once again, you can contact me at shockwaveskullsessions@gmail.com.
Thank you for listening to the Shockwave Skull Sessions podcast. Subscribe and listen to all episodes by going to our pages on iTunes, Spreaker, YouTube, Spotify, and more. You can listen to all other episodes and access up-to-date information and news on the Shockwave Skull Sessions podcast by going to our website at www.shockwaveskullsessions.com. Email all comments, questions, and suggestions to shockwaveskullsessions@gmail.com.